As someone who lives on the other side of the world, when I started to do more research and get to know more about European zoos, the first one that really caught my attention was the Royal Burger Zoo in the Netherlands, because it reminded me just a little bit of the Henry Dorley Zoo in Omaha, Nebraska. Both seem to have a go big or go home mentality. Both have a giant indoor rainforest, some of the best zoo-based aquariums in the world, and the world's largest indoor zoo deserts. Thanks to an anonymous viewer that is responsible for bringing the Burger Zoo to zoo tours, and a few clips from my European counterpart, we get to walk through a living simulation that's inspired by the Sonoran and Mojave deserts that are located in the southwestern US and northwestern Mexico. I'll get to the specifics later, but I will say for now, when this eco display opened in 1994, the Guinness Book of World Records crowned the Burgers Desert as the biggest indoor desert in any zoo. Now, as usual, before we start the walkthrough, I would like to see if all of you can name this species that will appear in the next episode. The entrance to the desert, in a slight bit of irony, is located at the end of your journey in the Bush Rainforest exhibit. So in a few steps, you'll go from the most lush and most green part of the zoo to the most dry. The automatic doors welcome you to enter a very dark 120-meter long tunnel. A tunnel that actually goes underground and connects one building to the next. This is actually themed after a deserted mine shaft abandoned by miners, but fortunately, not by nature. In my research, I found that this desert is home to over 1,000 individual animals, and I imagine a lot of them are these bats. From a first glance, something tells me that maybe a lot of people might think that these are bloodthirsty vampires, but this is a swarm of Seba's short-tailed bats. They both live in the same regions, but the short-tails mostly stick to fruit and the occasional nectar, pollen, and insect. This is where you really start to see that the designers were going for the best visual experience possible to create a sense of realism. The mine shaft eventually becomes a natural cave. There's water dripping from the walls, fossils embedded in the rockwork, and a gorgeous display of stalagmites on the floor and stalactites on the ceiling, or otherwise mineral formations created by slow dripping water that can take tens of thousands of years to form. At the far end of the hall, if you look down, there's actually a pool filled with Mexican blind cavefish. You heard that right, blind. Naturally, they live in pitch-black caves, sort of like what you see here, so eyesight is useless, and like their name suggests, they evolved to not see. What's weird is that they actually do develop eye structures as embryos, but eventually degenerate and skin and connective tissue grows over them. I know you guys are dying to get out into the sun and cook under that beautiful ceiling, but what I like about this is that Burgers really highlights the nightlife of the desert. The stuffy tunnel continues and tasks you to find the smallest critters in the building. There are 6 more glass-enclosed displays, and like we saw in the Burgers Ocean episode, the designers did a phenomenal job keeping the quality consistent and blending the habitat space with our own. And one blends in so well that you might easily skip it if it weren't for the signs. There are 6 species, some are familiar faces like the Colorado river toad, milk snake, Mexican Redknee tarantula, and even cave crickets. But I've never actually had the privilege of seeing the other 2. Merriam's kangaroo rat. Not a kangaroo, and also not a rat, but it's still a kind of nocturnal rodent. They have extremely long, roo-like feet that almost gives them the ability to move around on 2 feet and 2 feet only. And as you might expect, they can use them to spring up to 9 feet in one leap. The other unfamiliar friend is the Hispid Cotton Rat. They're actually pretty common in the southeastern United States, and I'm kind of disappointed that I've never heard of them. They thrive in grassy areas and farmland, and of course, they breed a lot. One litter can have up to 15 pups. They're weaned in just 2 weeks and are as big as the adults in less than 2 months. And at last, light, but don't get too comfortable, because just a few steps ahead, we're diving right back into the shadows for an exhibit that delivers not 1, but 2 painful bites. The first comes from the Gila monster, a slow-moving beaded lizard and the only native venomous lizard in the United States. Because they inject a smaller amount of venom per bite, they're rarely fatal to us, but their venom is actually still just as toxic as a western diamondback rattlesnake. Well, this is actually a red diamond from Baja, California. and they're one of the rarest snakes in the zoo world, and clearly one of the friendliest. They actually are one of the least toxic rattlers, but one love bite from them can lead to bruising, swelling, tissue damage, and other not so fun things. Their exhibit is probably my favorite in the desert. This time it's an abandoned campsite, although the shoes and socks tell me that it probably wasn't abandoned by choice. And as a bonus, you can clearly see into the next habitat. Since we're finally out here, let's talk about this ecosystem. Deserts are naturally hostile, and the zoo wanted to reflect that as much as possible while still keeping it visitor friendly. There's towering rocks, canyons, fake petrified tree trunks, and a simulated digging site of a T-Rex skeleton. During winter months, the space is heated to 10 degrees Celsius, but in the summer, they sort of just let the sun do its thing. The zoo reported that the temperature record is 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of the glass panels can open, but they're still meshed to contain the dozen or so free-ranging birds. I did say earlier that this opened as the largest indoor desert in any zoo. Well, speaking of Omaha, that record was claimed by the Henry Dorley Zoo's Desert Dome in 2002, but it only covers around 4,000 square meters, while the one in Burgers covers over 6,000 square meters. Although Omaha's is 41 meters tall, while the ceiling in Burgers is somewhere around 7. So I guess Burgers wins in surface area, while Henry Dorley wins in volume. Now also, Omaha's is very open for the most part, but I like how this one in the Netherlands has a lot of paths that are more enclosed, so you really never know what surprise is waiting for you around every corner. Except for our next animal, because you can see them from the Rattlesnake Cave. These are peccaries, also known as javelinas, and they're one of the most adaptable animals in the world. They survive grasslands, tropical forests, and of course, the desert. As a tour group, we learned a few months ago that while they may look like pigs, peccaries have different teeth, their faces are more narrow, they have 3 stomach chambers, while true pigs only have 1. So if I didn't imply it already, peccaries are not true pigs. This is one of the desert's few open-air enclosures. Since they didn't have to use mesh, wires, or glass, the zoo used the opportunity to make everything here look as natural as possible. The peccaries are surrounded by nothing but trees and rock. And, well, I guess that one glass panel in the back there. The barrier is also so low on our end, you can actually find photos online of people sitting on it. Now, I might have thrown you off a little and you probably have no idea where you are. Fortunately, I got permission from a very generous member on ZooChat.com to use their map. So here are the peccaries, and our next stop is up there. The desert is very bird-centric, but not all of them can wander everywhere. There's roadrunners and burrowing owls who didn't seem to show, and they both have their own home in the corner. And to continue the theme of naturalism, the designers tried their best to make it not too obvious that you were looking at an aviary, since it starts on the sloping sand that's on the guest side, and the mesh looks like it goes into the ground. And the rocks on the right actually initially hide that there's more to this exhibit, and it can be viewed from another cave. If you're wondering why these birds are separated, if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably because they are known to eat the occasional bird. We're gonna take a break from getting our tan or sunburn on one more time. Actually, 2 more times. Before you have time to let your eyes adjust, up ahead you'll see a bunch of blurs from a mammal of many names. The ringtail, or ring-tailed cat, miner's cat, or cacomissal. One time I tried to explain this animal to a friend, and they said, "Oh yeah, a ring-tailed lemur. Yeah, I know that." Nope, not a lemur, not a cat. And in my vocabulary, they're not cacomissals because that refers to a ring-tailed relative, which is a different species. Ringtails and cacomissals are actually most closely related to the raccoon. They're also not alone in these caverns. Down the hallway, because their habitat is so dark and because the species is so small, I wish you all luck to find the cactus mouse, another very small rodent from northern Mexico and the American Southwest. They weigh about an ounce and are 20 centimeters in length, including the tail, and females are actually larger. Living conditions in the wild aren't exactly easy, and they only live to see their first birthday. But in managed care, they can live to be nearly 7.5 years old. Right now, there are two ways that you can leave the shadows behind: follow the main path, or do the right thing and pay a visit to the Birds in the Canyon walk-thru aviary. I read somewhere that this was home to a striking crested caracara, but the zoo opted for smaller feathers, and they are gorgeous. I didn't even know they made birds this beautiful. And they're really easy to find, considering the assorted palette of the desert. But the one that doesn't stand out is also the one that the zoo calls the most exceptional animal in the park: the Socorro dove. Native to the Socorro Island, 600 kilometers off of Mexico's west coast. Some of us might think of doves as such a common animal, but these are so endangered, they've been extinct in the wild since the early 70s from habitat destruction, construction of a military base, and introduction of feral kitty cats. You'll actually find some of them outside of this aviary, but I think the ones that are inside are taking part in a breed and release program that eventually will introduce offspring to the Socorro Island when their habitat is restored and invasive species are removed. As you might be able to tell from the map, we are on our way to the largest exhibit in the desert. One of our last stops was where you could find this attraction's largest species. If you came here in 2021, you'd find the California bighorn sheep. Bighorn sheep in general are extremely rare in Europe, but after 27 years, the zoo decided to phase out the herd, but at least they released a statement with an explanation. We made this choice because there are very few EAZA zoos in Europe that have this species in their collection. This not only makes it difficult to move young animals to suitable fellow zoos, but in the long term also poses a challenge in keeping the genetic variation high within the zoo population to be sustainable in the future. They reportedly transferred the sheep to a bison farm in France, and they modified their old exhibit in here to support 3 mammals, additional peccaries, a lot of soil for black-tailed prairie dogs so that they can create tunnel systems like they would in the wild, and also included more climbing structures for North American porcupines. The sheep were definitely a major loss, but at least their replacements are a fun mix, and they even kept the crevice that gives you a nice overview of the desert and brings you closer to the animals. The entire back wall on the southern part of the eco display gives off a major southwestern US or Mexican vibe with Pueblo-style architecture, rooftop terraces, and I think they used to serve Tex-Mex food here, but I'm pretty sure these days it's just the seating area. But hey, at least you can still sit down and enjoy the views from here. In case you were really missing out on those tunnels, the last one is the most educational. It actually talks about the desert as a biome and ecosystem. There's a cutout that asks you if this woman has everything she needs to survive in the desert, because while it can get hot, obviously, the desert can also be unbearably cold. And there is one exhibit, another one that has the lights shut off, and another that features a second ringtail. And finally, one quick skip over the stream in the path cracks, which is a really nice touch, and that brings us to the desert's top right corner and our final habitat of the tour. This one is almost fully enclosed by rock, but the harp wire does the rest. This used to be a lair for a bobcat until at least 2023, but I do find it to be a little more appropriate to its current resident, and that is another North American porcupine. Next on Zoo Tours, the channel members have spoken and they voted to stay right here in the Netherlands. And we're going to go directly north of the desert to explore their Rimba attraction, also known as the Asian section of the Royal Burger Zoo, to observe and learn about animals that are disappearing from American zoos and may never be featured on the channel again. So, as always, please stay tuned for our next adventure. Stay wild, and thank you all for watching Zoo Tours.